They say the heart wants what it wants, but nobody tells you that sometimes what your heart wants can destroy everything you've built. I learned that lesson the hard way, and it cost me every single thing I'd worked 40 years to earn. But let me start from the beginning, because this story, my story, it needs to be told. If you like our videos, please subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support means everything. I was 62 years old when I finally hung up my work boots for the last time. 4 decades of construction work, early mornings that started before the sun came up, late nights when my body screamed for rest but the bills demanded more. I wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but I had something. $380,000 in my retirement account. It wasn't a fortune, but combined with my monthly pension of about $1,800, I thought I had enough to finally breathe. Enough to finally live. I'd been divorced twice, no kids, and honestly, I was tired of the cold winters in Chicago. Tired of the loneliness that came with living in a city where everyone moved too fast to notice you existed. I'd been researching for almost 2 years, reading forums, watching videos, talking to other guys who'd made the move. Costa Rica kept coming up again and again, warm weather all year round, friendly people, and a cost of living that meant my money could actually last. The dream was simple. Find a quiet place near the beach, rent a small house, maybe meet some friends, live out my days in peace. That was it. That was all I wanted. When my plane touched down in San Jose, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe the second half of my life could be better than the first. I'd booked a small apartment in the capital for the first month, just to get my bearings, learn some Spanish, figure out where I actually wanted to settle. The city was alive in a way Chicago never was for me. Colors everywhere, music spilling out of bars and restaurants, people actually smiling at strangers. I started going to this little cafe every morning, practicing my terrible Spanish with the owner, an older woman named Rosa who would laugh at my pronunciation, but always understood what I was trying to say. She told me about different towns, places where expats lived, places that were quieter, more authentic. After 3 weeks of exploring, I decided on a coastal town about 2 hours from the capital. It wasn't touristy, wasn't overrun with Americans, just a genuine fishing village with a beautiful beach and rent that was less than a third of what I'd been paying back home. I found a 2-bedroom house, nothing fancy, but it had a porch that looked out toward the ocean, and I could hear the waves at night. $500 a month, including utilities. I signed the lease feeling like I'd finally done something right with my life. The first few months were exactly what I'd hoped for. I'd wake up early, walk along the beach, stop for coffee at a local place where the owner, Marco, started recognizing me and had my order ready before I even asked. I'd spend my afternoons reading, exploring nearby towns, learning the bus routes, making small talk with neighbors. My Spanish was getting better, slowly but surely. I was spending maybe $1,200 a month total, and I was living well. Really well. I felt healthy. The stress that had lived in my shoulders for years was finally melting away, and for the first time since I was a young man, I felt like I had a future to look forward to, instead of just surviving day by day. I'd made a few friends too, mostly other expats. Guys like me who'd worked their whole lives and decided to try something different. We'd meet up for beers, share stories, compare notes on doctors and dentists, complain about American politics from a safe distance. It was good. It was simple. It was enough. That's when I met Valentina. It was at a birthday party for one of the guys I'd become friends with, an Australian named Pete, who'd lived there for 5 years. He'd invited a bunch of locals, people from the town, and she was there with her cousin. I noticed her immediately, not just because she was beautiful, which she was, but because when she laughed it was this genuine, full sound that made everyone around her smile too. She was younger than me, I knew that right away, maybe early 30s, but there was something warm and open about her that drew me in. We ended up talking that night, mostly in Spanish with some English mixed in when I got stuck. She worked at a hotel in the next town over, at the front desk, and she'd grown up in this area. She asked me about America, about why I'd left, and I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone. About the loneliness, about feeling invisible, about wanting something different before it was too late. She listened in a way that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered. When the party ended, she wrote her number on a napkin and told me I should call her if I wanted someone to show me the real Costa Rica, not the tourist version. I kept that napkin in my wallet for 3 days, before I got the courage to text her. Our first real time together was at a local festival, one of those things tourists never knew about. She picked me up on her scooter, and I remember feeling ridiculous. This 62-year-old American man holding on to this young woman as we zipped through the streets. But I was also smiling bigger than I had in months. The festival was incredible. Live music, food vendors, families dancing together, and Valentina knew everyone. She introduced me to what felt like half the town, and people were welcoming in a way that made me feel less like an outsider and more like I belonged. We danced, or at least I tried to, while she laughed at my attempts, and we ate until I thought I might burst. When she dropped me off at my house that night, she kissed my cheek and said we should do it again soon. I went to bed feeling something I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. That electric possibility that maybe, just maybe, something special was starting. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more and more. She'd finish her shift at the hotel and meet me for dinner. I'd pick her up on Sundays and we'd drive to different beaches, spending the day swimming and talking and just being together. She told me about her family, her parents who'd passed away when she was young, her 2 younger brothers who she'd helped raise, her dreams of one day opening her own small hotel or bed and breakfast. I told her about my failed marriages, about the years I'd spent alone, about how I'd almost given up on the idea that connection was possible. She never made me feel old or foolish. She never made me feel like I was anything other than someone worth knowing. And maybe that's what got me. After so many years of feeling like I was just taking up space in the world, here was this incredible woman who made me feel seen. One night, about 2 months after we met, she stayed over at my place. It just happened naturally. No big decision or discussion, just the 2 of us not wanting the evening to end. When I woke up the next morning and saw her sleeping next to me, peaceful and beautiful, I felt terrified and grateful all at once. Terrified because I knew I was falling for her, and that meant I had something to lose again. Grateful because despite everything, despite all the years and mistakes and loneliness, I'd somehow found this. By month 3, she was spending most nights at my place. We'd fallen into this comfortable routine, cooking together, watching movies with Spanish subtitles so I could practice, taking evening walks along the beach. She started keeping clothes at my house, toiletries in the bathroom, and it felt like we were building something real. I was careful with money, though, mindful of not repeating past mistakes. I'd cover dinners out and groceries, help with gas money for her scooter, but I wasn't going crazy. I was still living on about $1,500 a month, which felt responsible and sustainable. But then things started shifting in ways that were so gradual, I didn't notice at first. She mentioned her scooter needed repairs, and the shop quoted her $400. She was stressed about it because she needed it to get to work. I offered to pay for it without thinking twice. It made sense to help her. 2 weeks later, her brother needed money for some kind of certification course for his job, $300. She was embarrassed to even mention it, but I could see how worried she was. I gave her the money. It wasn't a loan in my mind. It was what you did for people you cared about. Then her aunt got sick and needed medication that wasn't covered. Another $200. Her cousin's daughter needed school supplies and uniforms. $150. It was never huge amounts at once, and it always came with this gratitude and affection that made me feel needed and important. But when I actually looked at my bank account at the end of that month, I'd spent almost $3,000, twice my normal budget. I told myself it was just a rough month, that things would level out. They didn't level out. She started talking about us getting a place together, something bigger and nicer than my little beach house. She found this beautiful apartment in a new building, 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a balcony with an ocean view. The rent was $900 a month, more than I was paying, but not crazy. She was so excited about it, talking about how it could be ours, our home together, and I wanted that too. I wanted to feel like we were partners, equals, building a life. We moved in, and for the first month it was wonderful. She decorated, made it feel like a real home instead of just a place to sleep, and I felt proud every time I walked through the door. But then the requests started coming more frequently. She needed money for work clothes, because the hotel had standards. She needed her phone upgraded, because hers was dying. Her brother needed help with rent, because he'd lost his job. Her younger cousin wanted to go to university, but couldn't afford the fees. Every single time, it came with tears or stress or this genuine seeming desperation. that made me feel like I was the only one who could help. And I did help. Again and again and again. I started pulling money from my retirement account more frequently. Just 1,000 here, 2,000 there. It didn't seem catastrophic in the moment, but I wasn't paying attention to the bigger picture, to the fact that my 380,000 was dropping steadily month after month. By the 6-month mark of us living together, I'd already spent close to $40,000. I know that sounds insane reading it back now, but it happened so gradually, and she was so good at making each request seem reasonable and temporary. Plus, I was happy. That was the thing people don't understand. I was happier than I'd been in decades, and part of me thought that happiness was worth the price. She made me feel young again, made me feel like I mattered, made me feel loved in a way I'd forgotten was possible. When you've been lonely for as long as I had been, that feeling becomes addictive. You'll do almost anything to keep it. I started noticing small things, though, things that didn't quite add up. She'd mentioned going shopping with friends, but come home with designer bags that seemed expensive for someone working a front desk job. She'd get phone calls and step out onto the balcony to take them, lowering her voice in a way that felt secretive. When I'd ask who called, she'd wave it off as work or family, nothing important. She started going out more in the evenings. Girls' nights, she called them, and she wouldn't come home until 2 or 3 in the morning. When I'd express concern, she'd accuse me of being jealous or controlling, turn it around so I felt guilty for even bringing it up. I'd apologize and tell myself I was being paranoid. She was younger than me, she had her own life, her own friends. I couldn't expect her to spend every moment with me just because I was retired and had nothing else to do. Then came the investment opportunity. One of her friends, she said, was selling a share in a restaurant. It was a popular place near the beach that tourists loved, and the owner wanted to expand but needed capital. For $30,000, we could own 20% of the business, and according to Valentina, it was bringing in serious money every month. We'd make our investment back within a year, and then it would be pure profit. She showed me photos of the place, printed out papers that looked official, introduced me to a man she said was the owner. He spoke confidently about tourist numbers and profit margins, showed me receipts and booking records. It seemed legitimate. More than that, Valentina was so excited about it, talking about how this could be our future, our security, something we built together. She made it sound like this was about us, our partnership, our dreams. I was hesitant because 30,000 was a significant chunk of my remaining savings, but she kept pushing, kept talking about what it would mean for our future, and eventually, I gave in. I transferred the money to the account she gave me, and she was thrilled, kissing me and telling me how smart I was, how we were going to be so successful together. For about 2 weeks, I felt good about the decision, imagining myself as a business owner, picturing our financial future becoming secure. Then I never heard another word about it. When I asked Valentina for updates, she'd be vague, saying things were moving slowly, or that her friend was handling everything. When I suggested we visit the restaurant to check on our investment, she'd make excuses about why it wasn't a good time. After a month of this, I drove to the restaurant myself, walked in and asked the manager about new investors. He looked at me confused and said there were no new investors, no expansion plans, nothing. He'd never heard of Valentina or her friend. My stomach dropped so hard, I thought I might throw up right there in the restaurant. I went home and confronted her, trying to keep my voice calm but feeling panic rising in my chest. She got defensive immediately, angry that I'd gone behind her back, saying I'd embarrassed her, that her friend must have backed out of the deal and was too ashamed to tell her. She made it seem like she was a victim too, like we'd both been tricked. She cried and apologized and promised she'd get our money back. I wanted to believe her so badly that I let myself be convinced. She was so good at this, at making me doubt my own instincts, at turning situations around, so I felt guilty for questioning her. But things got worse from there. She started being gone more often, sometimes overnight, claiming she was staying with family or that her brother needed her. The affection between us cooled noticeably. She stopped initiating conversations, stopped asking about my day, stopped acting like we were in a relationship at all beyond sharing a space. When I tried to talk to her about it, to ask what was wrong, she'd snap at me about being suffocating or needy, said I was too old to understand what she was going through. That cut deeper than anything else. That reminder of our age difference being thrown at me like a weapon. I started checking my bank accounts obsessively, watching my balance drop month after month. I was down to $200,000, nearly half my retirement gone in less than a year. I tried to put my foot down about spending, told her we needed to cut back, that I couldn't keep pulling money out of my savings like this. She acted like I was being cruel, like I'd promised to take care of her and now I was abandoning her. She threatened to leave, to go back to her family. Said she'd made a mistake trusting an American who only saw her as a transaction. It was manipulative and I knew it, but the fear of losing her, of going back to being alone, was stronger than my logic. I kept giving in, kept saying yes when I should have been saying no. Then one morning I woke up and she was gone. Not just out for the day gone, but all her clothes, her things, everything cleared out while I'd been sleeping. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said she needed space, that this wasn't working, that she'd be in touch. I called her phone probably 50 times that day. It went straight to voicemail. I texted, begged her to talk to me, asked what I'd done wrong. Nothing. Complete silence. I felt like my chest was being crushed, like I couldn't breathe properly. I drove to the hotel where she worked, thinking maybe she'd talk to me in person. The manager there, a kind older woman, looked at me with pity and said Valentina had quit 3 months ago. She hadn't worked there in months. My brain couldn't process that information at first. 3 months. But she'd been leaving for work every day, coming home talking about guests and problems at the front desk. Where had she been going? The manager must have seen something in my face, because she gently suggested I might want to talk to some of the other expats in town, that I wasn't the first foreign man to go through something like this. I felt humiliated beyond words, standing there in that hotel lobby, realizing that everyone probably knew what was happening except me. I spent the next 2 weeks trying to track her down, asking people if they'd seen her, driving to addresses she'd mentioned as family homes, only to find people who'd never heard of her. One person finally took pity on me, an older local man who'd seen me asking around. He told me in broken English that there were women in this area who targeted foreign retirees, that it was known, that they worked together sometimes, sharing information and strategies. He said the restaurant investment scam was common, that the official-looking papers were easy to fake, that they'd approach men who seemed lonely and vulnerable. He said Valentina probably wasn't even her real name. I felt sick, physically sick, like my body was rejecting this information, even as my brain knew it was true. Every memory we'd made together suddenly looked different, tainted, like I was seeing it through a new lens and realizing it had all been a performance. The way she'd listened so intently when we first met, the enthusiasm about building a life together, the tears when she needed money, all of it carefully calculated to extract as much as possible before disappearing. I'd been a mark, a target, nothing more. I checked my bank account that night with shaking hands. $150,000 left. I'd lost $230,000 in less than a year. Gone, just gone. Spent on fake emergencies, fraudulent investments, rent on an apartment that was too expensive, helping family members who may or may not have even existed. I did the math obsessively, writing it all out, trying to understand how it had happened so fast. The scooter repair, the brother's certification course, the aunt's medication, the cousin's school fees, the work clothes, the upgraded phone, all those dinners out, the apartment deposit and rent, the $30,000 restaurant investment, the countless smaller amounts I'd given her for this and that and the other thing. It was all there in black and white, a chronicle of my own stupidity. The worst part was knowing I couldn't report it to anyone. What would I say? That I'd voluntarily given money to my girlfriend and now I wanted it back? That I'd made terrible financial decisions and wanted someone to fix them? I had no legal recourse, no evidence of fraud, just a trail of bank transfers and ATM withdrawals that told the story of an old fool who'd believed a young woman actually loved him. My pension of $1,800 a month suddenly felt tiny, insufficient, not nearly enough to live on in the way I'd been living. I had to move out of the expensive apartment, go back to looking for something cheap, and even finding a place for $500 felt like a stretch now. I was angry all the time, at myself more than anyone else. Angry that I'd been so desperate for connection that I'd ignored every red flag, every warning sign, every moment my instinct told me something was off. The other expats in town treated me differently now too. Word had spread about what happened, and I could see it in their faces when they looked at me. Pity mixed with judgment, mixed with fear that they could be next. Some guys avoided me altogether, like my failure was contagious. Others wanted to share their own stories, their own close calls, their own suspicions about women they were seeing, and I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be the cautionary tale, the example of what not to do, the old American who lost everything chasing after a fantasy. I tried to pick up some work, thinking maybe I could rebuild some of what I'd lost, but I was 63 years old in a country where I barely spoke the language, competing with locals who'd work for a fraction of what I needed, and nobody wanted to hire an aging American for construction jobs when there were younger, cheaper options available. I managed to find some handyman work here and there, fixing things for other expats, getting paid under the table, but it was inconsistent and exhausting. My body wasn't what it used to be, and after a full day of physical work, I'd come home to my cheap little room feeling every one of my 63 years. I started drinking more than I should have, sitting on my porch with cheap beer watching the sunset, wondering how I'd managed to destroy my entire retirement in less than 12 months. The dreams I'd had when I first arrived, the peace and relaxation and simple happiness, they felt like they'd belonged to a different person entirely. That version of me was naive and trusting and hopeful. This version was bitter and suspicious and defeated. The months crawled by slowly. I fell into a depressing routine of working whatever jobs I could find, buying the cheapest food possible, avoiding other people as much as I could because I didn't want to explain my situation over and over. I'd see young couples together, local women with older foreign men, and I'd wonder if they were real or if the guy was just another mark like I'd been. Part of me wanted to warn them, to pull them aside and tell them to be careful. But I knew how I'd have reacted if someone had tried to warn me about Valentina. I'd have thought they were jealous or bitter, or didn't understand our special connection. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. I learned that the hard way. My retirement account sat at $150,000, barely a third of what I'd started with, and I tried not to think about how long it would last if I had any kind of emergency. Medical issue, unexpected expense, anything outside my tight budget could wipe out what little security I had left. The fear was constant, living in the back of my mind, making it hard to sleep, hard to enjoy anything because I was always calculating and worrying and preparing for the next disaster. Then about 8 months after Valentina disappeared, I saw her. I was in the next town over, picking up some supplies at a hardware store, and she walked past on the street with another man. An older guy, probably in his 70s, white hair, expensive-looking clothes. She was holding his arm, laughing at something he said, looking at him with that same warm, attentive expression she used to give me. My heart stopped. Actually stopped for a second. She looked right at me, made direct eye contact, and there was no recognition there at all. Nothing. She looked through me like I was a stranger, like we'd never met, like she hadn't spent nearly a year of her life with me taking everything I had. Then she turned back to the man she was with and kept walking, and I just stood there on the sidewalk feeling like I might collapse. She was running the same game on someone else, probably telling him the same stories, probably introducing him to the same friends with the same investment opportunities, and he was walking into it with the same stupid, hopeful smile I'd had when I met her. I thought about following them, about pulling the guy aside and warning him, telling him everything. But what good would it do? He'd think I was crazy, jealous, lying. She'd spin it somehow, make me the villain, and he'd believe her because he'd want to believe her, just like I had. So I let them walk away, and I went home and drank myself into a stupor, trying to forget the look on her face when she saw me. That blank, empty, nothing look that told me I'd never mattered at all. That night was my breaking point. I couldn't stay in Costa Rica anymore. Every street corner reminded me of my stupidity. Every beautiful sunset felt mocking. Every happy couple I saw made me angry and sad at the same time. I'd come here dreaming of a peaceful retirement, and instead I'd found financial ruin and heartbreak, and the kind of shame that settles into your bones. I started making plans to go back to Chicago. I didn't want to. God knows I didn't want to admit defeat and return to the cold and loneliness I'd been running from, but I couldn't afford to stay. My pension would go further in the States if I was careful, and at least there I wouldn't be surrounded by constant reminders of my failure. I reached out to my older brother, swallowed my pride, and asked if I could stay with him for a while until I got back on my feet. The silence on the phone when I asked was deafening, but eventually he said yes. Said I could take the spare bedroom in his basement. It wasn't what I wanted, living with family at 63 years old, dependent and broke, but it was what I had left. The flight back to Chicago was one of the longest experiences of my life. I sat in my economy seat, squeezed between two strangers, thinking about everything I'd lost. Not just the money, though that hurt enough on its own, but the hope. The belief that my life could still be good, that connection was possible, that I deserved happiness. Valentina had taken all of that along with my savings, and I didn't know if I'd ever get it back. When we landed and I walked through O'Hare Airport, I felt like a ghost, like I was watching my own life from outside my body. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to be sitting on a beach somewhere, reading a book, watching the waves, living out my golden years in peace. Instead, I was moving into my brother's basement with $150,000 to my name and no idea how to rebuild. My brother picked me up from the airport, and the look he gave me said everything he was thinking without words. Disappointment, judgment, that I told you so energy that family members specialize in. The drive to his house in the suburbs was quiet, except for the occasional comment about the weather or traffic. When we pulled up, his wife came out to meet us, all forced smiles and tight hugs, and I could feel her resentment at having to accommodate her husband's failure of a brother. The basement room was small and damp, barely furnished with a twin bed and a dresser, but it was free and it was shelter and it was all I deserved. The first few months back were brutal. Winter in Chicago felt even colder than I remembered, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and doesn't let go. I tried to find work, but nobody wanted to hire a 63-year-old man with a years-long gap in his employment history. I applied for jobs I was overqualified for, positions that paid minimum wage, and still got rejected over and over. My brother started making comments about rent, about how I needed to contribute something if I was going to live there indefinitely, and the pressure to find any source of income became overwhelming. I eventually found a part-time job at a hardware store, stocking shelves and helping customers, making $12 an hour. It was humiliating, standing in that red vest helping people pick out screws and paint colors, but it was money and I needed money. Between my pension and the part-time work, I was bringing in maybe $2,500 a month, and my brother wanted $800 of that for rent. I gave it to him because I had no choice, and I tried to live on what was left, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I started therapy, one of those sliding scale places where you pay what you can afford, because I was falling apart mentally. The anger and shame and regret were eating me alive, and I needed help processing it all. My therapist, a young woman probably half my age, listened to my story with the kind of professional sympathy that made me feel even worse. She talked about patterns and vulnerability, and how trauma makes us susceptible to manipulation, and all of it was probably true, but it didn't change the fact that I'd lost everything. She suggested I might have been suffering from loneliness-induced desperation, that my need for connection had overridden my logical thinking, that I wasn't the first or last person to make decisions from a place of emotional scarcity. It was supposed to make me feel better, understanding the psychology behind my mistakes, but it just made me feel weak and stupid and foolish. The weeks turned into months, and I fell into a new routine. Wake up in the basement, go to my minimum wage job, come home, eat a cheap dinner, watch TV in my room, go to sleep, repeat. This was my life now, and every day I thought about how different it could have been if I'd just been smarter, more careful, less desperate for love. My brother and I started fighting more as time went on. He'd make comments about me needing to get a real job, to stop feeling sorry for myself, to man up and take responsibility for my choices. Easy for him to say from his comfortable position with his wife and his house and his intact retirement savings. He didn't understand what it felt like to have hope ripped away, to realize you'd been played by someone you trusted, to know your best years were gone and what was left was just survival. His wife was even worse, sighing dramatically whenever I came upstairs, making pointed comments about groceries disappearing and utility bills going up. I tried to make myself as invisible as possible, but you can't be invisible when you're a burden, and that's what I was. A burden on my family, a cautionary tale to my friends, a warning to other men about what happens when you think with your heart instead of your head. I thought about Valentina constantly, obsessively. Where was she now? Was she with that older man I'd seen her with? Had she moved on to someone new? How many men had she done this to? How much money had she stolen total? Did she ever think about me or feel any guilt at all? The not knowing ate at me, kept me up at night, invaded my thoughts when I was trying to focus on anything else. I hated that she still had this power over me, that even after everything, part of me missed her. Missed the way she made me feel, even if it was all fake. That's the cruelest part of this kind of con. They don't just take your money. They take your ability to trust your own feelings, your own judgment. They make you doubt everything you thought you knew about yourself. By the time I'd been back in Chicago for a year, I'd managed to save about $10,000 from my part-time job. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress, like maybe I could eventually move out of my brother's basement and find my own place. Something small, a studio apartment maybe, just enough space to have some dignity again. But then my car broke down, needed a new transmission, and there went $4,000 of my savings. Then I got sick, some kind of infection that required antibiotics and a doctor's visit. And even with insurance, that cost another $800. The universe seemed determined to keep me down, to make sure I never got ahead. And I started wondering if this was just how the rest of my life would be. One step forward, two steps back. Always struggling, always behind, always paying for that 1 year of stupidity in Costa Rica. I'd go to work and see couples shopping together, holding hands, laughing about paint colors. And I'd feel this deep aching envy mixed with cynicism. Were they real? Did she actually love him? Or was she waiting for the right moment to take everything? I couldn't look at any May-December relationship without wondering if it was genuine or if someone was being played. Maybe that makes me bitter, but bitter felt safer than hopeful. Bitter protected me from making the same mistakes again. My therapist kept telling me I needed to forgive myself, that holding on to the shame and anger was only hurting me more. She said I'd been a victim of a crime, even if it wasn't prosecutable, that I deserved compassion from myself more than punishment. But I couldn't forgive myself. Every time I looked at my bank account and saw $160,000 instead of $380,000, I felt that same crushing weight of stupidity. That was $220,000 I'd never get back. $220,000 that represented decades of early mornings and back-breaking work, and saying no to things I wanted so I could save for the future. And I'd given it away to someone who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with feelings, someone who'd probably laughed about me with her friends while I was falling asleep next to her, thinking we were building a life. The therapy helped a little bit with the depression, gave me tools to cope with the anxiety, but it couldn't change the fundamental reality of my situation. I was 64 years old, working part-time at a hardware store, living in my brother's basement, with a retirement fund that was half what it should be. Those were just facts, and no amount of positive thinking or self-compassion was going to change them. I started going to a support group for people who'd been victims of financial fraud, thinking maybe it would help to talk to others who understood. The stories I heard there were horrifying and comforting at the same time. Horrifying because of how common this kind of thing was, how many variations existed, how sophisticated the scammers had become. Comforting because I wasn't alone, because other people had made similar mistakes and were trying to rebuild. There was a woman there who'd lost her entire inheritance to a romance scam, a man who'd been catfished online and sent money for years to someone he'd never met in person, a couple who'd invested in a fraudulent business opportunity and lost their house. Compared to some of them, I'd gotten off easy, which was both reassuring and depressing. We'd sit in that church basement every Tuesday night, drinking bad coffee and sharing our stories, and there was something healing about being in a space where nobody judged you for being naive or desperate or trusting. We all understood. We'd all been there. We were all trying to figure out how to move forward when the path ahead looked so much darker than we'd expected. One of the guys in the group, Martin, had been through something similar to me. He'd met a woman from Brazil while on vacation, brought her back to the States, spent years supporting her and her family, only to discover she was married to someone else the whole time and had just been using him for money and a green card. He'd lost even more than I had, nearly $500,000, plus his house in the divorce settlement. But he'd managed to rebuild, found a decent job in his field, started dating again, learned to trust carefully. He took me out for coffee after one of the meetings and gave me advice that actually felt useful. He said the key was to separate what happened from who you are. To recognize that you made decisions based on the information and emotional state you had at the time, that beating yourself up served no purpose except to keep you stuck. He said the goal wasn't to forget or pretend it didn't hurt, but to integrate it as a learning experience rather than a defining failure. It sounded like therapy talk, and maybe it was, but hearing it from someone who'd been through it and come out the other side made it feel more real, more possible. I started trying to apply his advice, taking small steps toward building something new instead of just dwelling on what I'd lost. I picked up extra shifts at the hardware store when they were available, started looking into online certifications that might help me get a better job, began putting aside money again, with actual discipline this time. It was slow, painfully slow, but it was movement in a direction that wasn't backward. My relationship with my brother improved slightly when he saw I was actually trying, when the rent checks came on time every month, when I started contributing to groceries and helping around the house. I wasn't happy, not even close, but I was functional, and sometimes functional is enough. I celebrated my 65th birthday in that basement room with a cupcake I bought myself from the grocery store, thinking about where I'd thought I'd be at this age versus where I actually was. It was depressing as hell, but it was also survivable, and survival counted for something. About 18 months after returning to Chicago, I moved out of my brother's house and into my own studio apartment. It was small and not in a great neighborhood, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. And the sense of independence that came with closing that door and being alone in my own space was worth more than I can express. I'd rebuilt my savings to about $20,000, which wasn't much of a buffer, but it was something. I'd gotten promoted to assistant manager at the hardware store, which came with a small raise and slightly more respect. I was making almost $3,200 a month between the job and my pension, and for the first time since coming back, I felt like maybe I could actually make it. Not thrive, not live the dream retirement I'd imagined, but make it through to the other side of life without ending up homeless or completely destitute. I started dating again very cautiously, women my own age who had their own money and their own lives. It felt different, safer, less intense than what I'd had with Valentina, but maybe that was good. Maybe intense was just another word for dangerous. I went on dates to diners and coffee shops, had conversations about grandkids and health problems and medications, and it was fine. It was normal and age-appropriate and fine. But at night, when I was alone in my studio apartment, I'd still think about Costa Rica, about those first few months when everything felt possible, when I'd wake up to sunshine and ocean sounds, and believe that I'd finally gotten life right. I'd think about Valentina's laugh, the way she'd looked at me in those early days like I was someone worth seeing, and I'd hate myself for missing something that had never been real. The logical part of my brain understood it was all manipulation, every smile and touch and word carefully designed to extract maximum financial benefit. But the emotional part, the part that had been so desperately lonely for so long, that part still mourned what I thought we'd had. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting conned. The loss isn't just financial. It's the loss of the story you told yourself, the future you imagined, the person you thought you were. I'd believed I was someone who could be loved despite my age and my modest means, someone who deserved partnership and intimacy. Valentina had confirmed that belief and then destroyed it, and rebuilding that sense of self-worth was harder than rebuilding my bank account. I'm 66 now, 3 years removed from the worst mistake of my life, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath. My retirement account sits at about $180,000. I've managed to add back $20,000 through careful saving and smart investing, but I'll never recover the full amount I lost. The math just doesn't work. At my age, with my income, the best I can hope for is maintaining what I have and maybe adding a little each year. The dream of retiring again, of stopping work and just living, that's gone. I'll probably be working at that hardware store until I'm 70 or 75, until my body literally can't do it anymore, and then I'll be living on just my pension, scraping by in my studio apartment, hoping nothing major goes wrong. That's my future now. Not beaches and sunshine and peaceful days. Just survival, getting by, making it work. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I'd never met Valentina, if I'd stayed in my cheap beach house and kept my budget tight and just been alone. Would I have been happier? Would I have felt fulfilled? Or would I have died lonely and miserable, convinced I'd wasted my retirement being too cautious? I don't know. Maybe there's no right answer. Maybe the lesson isn't about being more careful or less trusting, but about recognizing that loneliness makes us vulnerable, that our need for connection can override every logical instinct we have, and that predators know this and use it. The support group helped me understand that what happened wasn't unique to me or to romance scams targeting older men abroad. It happens everywhere, in every demographic, in countless variations. Online dating scams, investment fraud, fake charity schemes, predatory loans, all of them targeting the same basic human vulnerabilities. The need to be seen to matter, to believe in something better than what we have. The people running these cons, they're not always evil geniuses. Sometimes they're just desperate people who've learned that manipulation pays better than honest work, and they've rationalized away any guilt by telling themselves their marks can afford it or deserve it or asked for it. Valentina probably told herself I was rich by her standards, that I could afford to help her, that I chose to give her the money so it wasn't really stealing. Maybe she even believed part of the act herself, convinced herself she cared about me at least a little, that it wasn't entirely fake. Or maybe I'm just making excuses for her, because accepting that someone could be that cold, that calculating, that willing to destroy another person's life for profit, that's almost harder to accept than believing I was just stupid. I still get angry sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep and I'm lying in bed thinking about everything. Angry at her for being a predator, angry at myself for being prey, angry at the world for being a place where this kind of thing happens so often it barely makes the news. Angry that there's no justice, no way to get my money back, no punishment for what she did except maybe karma somewhere down the line. But mostly I try to channel that anger into something productive. I volunteer at a senior center now, teaching a class about financial scams and how to protect yourself. I tell my story, all of it, including the embarrassing parts, because if it helps even one person avoid making the same mistakes, then maybe it wasn't entirely pointless. The people who come to my class, they're all older, all vulnerable in different ways, and I can see them nodding along as I talk, recognizing themselves in my story. After class, people come up to me and share their own experiences, their own close calls, their own losses. We've created a little community of survivors, people who've been burned but are trying to warn others about the fire. My therapist says I'm doing better, that I've made significant progress in processing the trauma and rebuilding my sense of self. She says the fact that I can talk about it publicly, that I'm using my experience to help others, shows real growth and resilience. Maybe she's right. I don't feel resilient most days. I feel tired and beaten down and older than my years. But I'm still here, still working, still trying, and that counts for something. I've accepted that my retirement will look different than I planned, that I'll probably never travel internationally again, that financial security is a luxury I no longer have. But I have my independence, my studio apartment, my job, my support group, my volunteer work. I have enough. Not what I wanted, not what I worked 40 years to build, but enough to survive on. And survival, as I've learned, is its own kind of victory. If I could go back and talk to the 62-year-old version of myself, stepping off that plane in San Jose full of hope and dreams, I don't know what I'd say. Don't go, stay home, be more careful, trust no one. None of that feels right. Because the problem wasn't going to Costa Rica or wanting connection or hoping for better. The problem was that I was so hungry for love and belonging that I couldn't see what was right in front of me, that I ignored every warning sign because acknowledging them meant losing the one thing that made me feel alive. Maybe I'd tell myself that being alone isn't the worst thing that can happen, that loneliness is survivable, that the pain of isolation is nothing compared to the pain of betrayal. So maybe I'd tell myself to be more careful, to go slower, to keep my money separate, to trust but verify. But honestly, I don't think that younger version of me would have listened. When you're drowning in loneliness and someone throws you a rope, you don't stop to check if it's attached to an anchor. You just grab hold and hope. What happened to me happens to thousands of people every year, probably more, and most of them never talk about it because the shame is overwhelming. We live in a culture that values independence and self-reliance, that sees victims of financial fraud as weak or stupid, or deserving of what happened. Nobody wants to be that person, the cautionary tale, the example of what not to do. But silence just helps the predators, lets them keep operating, keeps potential victims in the dark about how common and sophisticated these scams have become. So I talk about it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I can see judgment in people's eyes, because maybe my story will save someone else's savings, someone else's dream, someone else's future. If this whole nightmare experience can prevent even one other person from getting conned, then at least it meant something beyond my own suffering. I think about Valentina sometimes, less often now, but still more than I'd like, and I wonder if she ever thinks about me. Probably not. I was just a job to her, a role she played for 11 months until the money ran out, and then she moved on to the next mark without looking back. That man I saw her with is probably broke now too, wondering how he got so stupid, beating himself up for missing the signs that seem so obvious in hindsight. Or maybe he got lucky. Maybe he figured it out before she took everything. Maybe he's the one who got away. I'll never know. That's part of what makes this so hard. The not knowing, the questions that will never be answered, the closure that will never come. I can't confront her, can't demand explanations, can't even warn others about her because I don't know her real name or where she really came from or how to find her. She's a ghost. A beautiful, devastating ghost who haunted my life for less than a year, but whose impact will follow me until I die. The other day, a younger guy came into the hardware store, probably mid-30s, and started talking to me while I was helping him find supplies for a home repair. He mentioned he'd just gotten back from the Philippines, that he'd met an amazing woman there, that he was planning to bring her to the States and marry her. The way he talked about her, the excitement and hope in his voice, it was like hearing myself 3 years ago, and I felt physically ill. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him, tell him to be careful, to slow down, to protect himself. But I just smiled and nodded and wished him luck, because what else could I do? Maybe his situation is different. Maybe she really does love him. Maybe I'm just projecting my own trauma onto every cross-cultural relationship I see. Or maybe he's about to make the same mistake I did, and in a few years he'll be the one standing in a hardware store in a red vest, broke and broken, warning the next guy who won't listen. That's the cycle, I guess. The hopeful becoming the cautious, the trusting becoming the suspicious, each generation of victims trying to warn the next, while knowing most won't listen until it's too late. I've made peace with my role in this cycle, accepted that I can't save everyone, that all I can do is tell my truth and hope it reaches the people who need to hear it. My life now is small and simple, nothing like what I'd imagined when I was working those construction sites and dreaming of retirement. But it's real, it's mine, and nobody can take it away from me because I've learned the hard way to guard what little I have left. I date women my own age who have their own retirement savings and ask nothing from me except company. I budget carefully and track every expense. I maintain my studio apartment and my job and my routines. And if it's not exciting or romantic or fulfilling in the way I once hoped retirement would be, at least it's stable. The hardest part, the thing I still struggle with even now, is accepting that I'm not the person I thought I was. I'd always seen myself as smart, cautious, practical, someone who made good decisions and thought things through. The kind of guy who read the fine print and asked questions and didn't get fooled by obvious cons. But Valentina showed me that under the right circumstances, with the right emotional buttons pushed, I could be just as foolish and reckless as anyone else. That's a hard truth to live with, knowing that the person you think you are can disappear so completely when you're vulnerable enough. It's made me question everything about myself, my judgment, my instincts, my ability to read people and situations. I second-guess myself constantly now, overthinking every decision, suspicious of every kindness, unable to take anything at face value. It's exhausting living like this, but it feels safer than trusting the way I used to trust. My brother and I have a better relationship now than we did during those months I lived in his basement, probably because distance makes everything easier. We have dinner once a month, and he's stopped making comments about my choices, stopped acting like I'm an embarrassment to the family. His wife is civil to me, which is about the best I can hope for given how much of a burden I was during that dark period. We don't talk about what happened in Costa Rica anymore. It's understood, acknowledged in the past tense, but not something we revisit. My brother did tell me once, after a few beers, that watching what happened to me scared him, made him realize how easily it could have been him or anyone else. He said it made him more sympathetic, more understanding that these things happen to regular people, not just idiots and losers like he'd originally thought. It was probably the closest thing to an apology I'll ever get from him, and I appreciated it more than he knows. I'm writing this all down now 3 years later, because I want there to be a record of what happened, Not for revenge or justice or anything dramatic like that, but because I think it's important for people to understand how these things unfold, how smart people make stupid decisions, how quickly a dream can become a nightmare. If you're reading this and you're thinking about pursuing a relationship abroad, especially a relationship with a significant age or economic gap, please just be careful. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm not saying everyone is a scammer. But I am saying that the vulnerability that comes with loneliness and the desire for connection creates the perfect conditions for manipulation. Keep your finances separate. Go slow. Pay attention to red flags. Trust your instincts when something feels off. And most importantly, remember that if someone truly cares about you, they won't constantly need your money to solve emergencies and fund dreams. Love doesn't come with a price tag, and if it does, it's not love. I'll probably work until I'm 70, maybe longer if my health holds out and the hardware store keeps me on. I'll live in my studio apartment, attend my support group meetings, volunteer at the senior center, and try to help other people avoid my mistakes. I'll date casually, carefully, without expectation or intensity. I'll save what I can and hope nothing catastrophic happens. It's not the life I wanted or planned or worked 40 years to build, but it's the life I have, and I'm trying to make peace with that. Some days are better than others. Some days I wake up and feel almost okay. Like maybe I've turned a corner. Like maybe the worst is behind me. Other days I wake up furious and heartbroken, mourning everything I lost, hating myself for being so blind. But I keep going because what else is there to do? You survive, you adapt, you learn, you warn others, and you try to find small moments of peace in whatever life you have left. The lesson, if there is one, isn't complicated. Loneliness is dangerous. It makes us vulnerable to people who see that vulnerability as opportunity. It makes us ignore warning signs, rationalize red flags, and believe things we'd normally question. It makes us give away parts of ourselves, financial and emotional, to people who see us as resources rather than human beings. And the sad truth is, as long as there are lonely people with money, there will be predators ready to exploit that combination. The best protection is connection with people who have no financial stake in your life, community that asks nothing of you except participation, relationships built on mutual respect rather than need. If I'd had that in Costa Rica, if I'd built friendships and community before diving into romance, maybe things would have turned out differently. Or maybe I'd have ended up in the same place, just taking a different path to get there. I'll never know. What I do know is this: I survived. I lost almost everything, but I survived. I rebuilt enough to have independence and dignity. I found purpose in helping others avoid my fate. I learned what I'm capable of, both the good and the bad, and I'm trying to be better than I was. Not perfect, not healed, not whole, but better. Moving forward inch by inch, day by day, toward whatever future awaits. And if that future is just more days in a red vest helping customers find what they need, more nights in a small apartment watching TV alone, more years of careful budgeting and modest living, then so be it. I've accepted that this is my reality now, that the dream is over, that what remains is just the long, slow work of getting through. But I'm still here, still breathing, still trying, and some days that feels like enough. Not what I wanted, not what I deserved, but enough to keep going. That's all any of us can do, really. Keep going. Even when we don't want to, even when it hurts, even when everything we'd hoped for turned to ash. Keep going. And maybe somewhere along the way we find small moments of grace that make the journey bearable. That's what I'm hoping for anyway, in whatever years I have left. Small moments of grace in a life that didn't turn out the way I planned. It's not much, but after everything, it's all I've got.